Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for being here. My name is Valentina, and I lead UX3. Before we kick off with our presentations and everything, I would just like to say huge thanks to Zoe and to the entire team of Morgan McKinley for having us here with us today in this beautiful venue. Thank you so much, Zoe. So tonight, we'll be talking about how UX is changing. So the talks that you will hear today are not about tools or any kind of user interface. They are about how UX is becoming a business function. So let me start with just bringing forward with why we even started this conversation today. So AI has changed how products are built completely. So if you needed 10 people before to build something, today maybe you need one person, and over the weekend you can have your product ready and set for the market. But there's something that most people forget and don't even realize, is that maybe there is a case that AI has reduced the cost and changed the cost of building things, but it hasn't reduced the cost of a bad decision. And this is something that we'll be talking about today. So products are easier to ship than ever before, but the real bottleneck is not there anymore. It's just moved a little bit further. Execution is not hard part anymore. Hard part is judgment, prioritization, and a strategy. Companies are not looking for designers who are delivering screens anymore. Companies are looking for designers who are helping shape what gets built and why. UX is moving, and I think we're going to see more of this in other slides as well. So UX is moving. Older UX was about delivering screens. It was about a user experience designer being a voice of a user. Don't get me wrong, this is still the case, and it will be the case, but there's so many things that are coming on the top of that. So companies now expect designers to shape decisions. They want strategic direction and impact that they can measure. What we can see is that UX is slowly becoming a business function. Just a short word about UX3 before we move forward. UX3 helps designers to grow from execution to influence. We do this in 3 ways. We mentor designers so they can build their confidence, they can grow their real experience, and also grow their strategic thinking. Other way, we teach UX beyond screens. So we teach through business strategy and product thinking. And we're also creating a community where we are connecting designers with hiring managers and leads that are shaping the industry that it is today. There's one thing that UX3 is different from other course providers, and I'm going to say it clearly. We don't just teach UX, we're building UX designers. Our model works more like a studio rather than a school. So how it works is all people who are enrolled in our courses work directly with real companies on real projects, so no made-up briefs, nothing. There's a huge opportunity also for people who are performing well in the round to connect with those companies and also land the role in UX at the end of the program. And we built this approach with both of our programs, UX mentorship and a product strategy. And this is something that we're very proud of, because we believe that's what separates us from other course providers. Now, just honestly about UX market briefly, UX market has changed. Whether we want to speak about that or not, it did happen. So companies now expect broader skills than ever, which causes hiring process to be slower and also more selective. AI has completely changed how execution work, and strong portfolios are not enough anymore. So what happens is that designers are expected to understand business and product strategy instead of just taking care of the craft. But there is good news to everything. So there's a lot of opportunity for all the designers who manage to connect UX with business impact. And this is something that we'll be talking about tonight. So we have 4 beautiful speakers tonight who live and work this every single day. So we have Sarah from Microsoft. She will be talking about what happens when building becomes easy and how to sell the value of UX design again. Pooja from Arista Networks will share a few stories about how you can get a UX buy-in from product and leadership. Rebecca from UX and Y will show us how to connect UX with business outcomes, and Jane from VHI will tell us a story how UX has supported a major strategic shift in VHI. Just a few things from me. So we have 2 courses enrolling, this one in May. It's for designers who want to move from execution to influence. There's a exclusive attendee discount tonight. Just take a picture of that and you can use it on your checkout. Also, as I mentioned before, this is a course where we actually included work in a real company on a real project. We're teaching product thinking, business strategy, stakeholder management, UX KPI trees, roadmaps, and all sorts of things. It's a 6-week course. And then we have UX portfolio tune-up for all the designers who want to turn their experience into a portfolio that communicates impact. Kickoff is June 8th. Again, 20% off 3 weeks course. If you need more details about this, do let me know, catch me on a break or after. And yeah, just to conclude my little intro here, UX influence is earned through clarity, strategy, and impact. None of these come from tools. They come from the way that you're thinking and the way that you're connecting your work to something that business care about the most. That's it from me. I'm gonna hand over to Sarah.
To introduce myself, my name is Sarah. I'm a senior designer at Microsoft. And I've been designing for over 7 years now. And most of that time was actually working in a consultancy. But about a year and a half ago, I made the jump into in-house and joined Microsoft. And for the past year, I've been part of the growth team. If you're not familiar with growth, it's a cross-functional team that works across Microsoft products, focusing on helping users get started and driving adoption of Copilot. And more recently, I've taken on the role of a design DRI for agent growth. So I'm now focused on agent-driven growth across M365 Copilot. Our team is one of the largest in growth, and to give a sense of scale, that's myself, 2 other designers working alongside 40 engineers and 5 PMs. And it's been one of the most challenging yet rewarding experiences of my career. And to say it's challenging is because the pace is extraordinary. Engineers are working with AI tools, they're shipping faster than ever. And as a design team of 3, keeping up with that velocity while doing thoughtful, meaningful, customer centered work has become a real challenge. I've had engineers tell me directly that they don't need design input on work streams because AI can do it for them. And every time I advocate for us to stay involved, even as consultants, and every time they do end up needing us, not because they were wrong to move fast, but because there are things that only come to light when somebody is thinking about the person using the product. That experience is what I'm going to talk about today. I want to explore something that I think every designer is sitting with right now, and whether they're saying it out loud or not, what happens to our craft, our roles, our value in a world where AI can do so much of what we used to be able to do. I really don't have too much answers for it, but I've been thinking about it a lot lately, and I just have a perspective, and I just think it's worth sharing. So, how we got here, the bottleneck, it's continuously rotating. I kind of find it helpful to kind of look at this pattern because it isn't the first time our industry has been reshaped. Before 2010, the dynamic was clear. Engineers held the keys. Design was the afterthought. Designers were being handed finished features and just told to make it look pretty. Then 2010 came, and tools like Figma, Sketch gave us a shared language with engineers. Designers became the operators, and design systems meant that we weren't reinventing the wheel every sprint. And now the ground is shifting again. AI is removing the constraint of labor, shipping products, generating code, building interfaces. The bottleneck has moved from can we build this to should we build this? And that's the question that requires a kind of a little bit of a different set of skill to answer. And every year, designers are asked something new, and I really believe that this year it's judgment. So, our new reality, we've kind of entered a world where building is cheap. So, a year ago, when you kicked off a new feature, the timeline was predictable: research, design, exploration, engineering, build, iteration. It took months. Everyone understood the rhythm. You needed engineers, budget, and patience. Most ideas never made it past the pitch because the cost of building was so high. And now seeing engineers on my team, create prototypes in an afternoon. Um, AI generates like UI flows, even production ready code, things that used to require weeks of cross functional collaboration and coordination. And the cost of that creation has collapsed in a way that surprises me. Even though I'm living inside it like all the time, we've moved from a world where creating is scarce to where it's abundant. And that shift is exciting, but it also raises a lot of questions that I think I find myself asking a lot again and again. And I think you can all agree is if building is cheap, what then actually becomes valuable? And that's another thing that I kind of want to touch on today. So, um, building used to be the constraint and it isn't anymore. When you kind of look at these numbers, they're easy to gloss over. A working prototype, something that used to take my team weeks back and forth between designs and engineering, can now be created in hours. I have colleagues on my team build a functional prototype in a single afternoon using AI tools, something that would have been a 2-week project a year ago. And the cost of shipping an MVP has dropped to nearly nothing. And perhaps most significantly, the people who can build software are no longer trained engineers. They're product managers, they're designers, they're founders who are working alone in a coffee shop. And I think coming to terms with that it actually means when the ability to build is no longer scarce, it changes the entire value equation and it changes what we need to be good at as designers. So design is evolving, but it's not disappearing. I know that, like, there's lots of anxiety when AI is a topic in the room. I felt it myself, when, I first started seeing AI generate, UI in seconds. My honest reaction wasn't wasn't excitement. It was actually like I started looking at LinkedIn jobs that didn't have to like that didn't involve tech. So like if a tool can do something in minutes what used to take me days, where does that leave me? But the more I kind of sat with it, the more I've watched it play out on my own team, the more I've come to see it differently. Design isn't disappearing, it's evolving. The outputs AI generates are very impressive, but they're hollow without somebody who understands the people that they're meant for. And I kind of think back to projects where we did recently where, AI generated prototype looked beautiful, it looked clean, it looked modern, it had all the right patterns. But when you put it in front of the customer, they were confused within 30 seconds. The tool didn't have the context. It didn't know the audience. It didn't know their frustrations. It didn't know their workarounds. The empathy, that deep understanding the person who we're building for, it becomes really valuable, not less. When everyone has the same tools, the differentiator isn't who can build this. It's who can truly understand the person on the other side of the screen. And that's still us. So kind of the new bottleneck, when building is cheap, I think taste is now becoming expensive. And that, like this idea, if building is no longer the hard part, then what is? And I think the honest answer is taste, but not in the way people usually mean it. It's not aesthetics, it's not clean UI, it's not a visual polish. It's talking about something a lot deeper, the ability to look at 100 possible directions and know which one is the right one, to feel the difference between something that works and something that doesn't feel good to use. I think that, I think a lot in my work, there are moments in a design review where somebody will present something that technically meets every requirement, and yet something is off. It You can feel it. You have immediate, you can't always articulate it, but you know that there's something not right with that product. And having that instinct, knowing what to build, knowing what to leave out, knowing what feels right, that's not something you can train a model to do. It comes from years of watching real people use real products and caring deeply about what you saw. So I believe that we're gonna drown in mediocre software. It's something that I've been kind of noticing more and more. everything is starting to look really, really similar. When I'm browsing, new apps, I kind of get this like feeling that I've already used what I'm looking at. And I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing, but I'm starting to see the same layout patterns, the same interaction models, the same tone of voice, and it all blurs together. When the barrier to creating software, um, when the when the barrier of creating software disappears, you get more software, but not necessarily better software. The features converge, the interfaces converge, but what doesn't converge is how something feels to use. That sense that somebody actually thought about your experience, they cared about how you felt, they cared about your experience is still rare. And I think that's increasingly where the real value lives. Not in what a product does, but in what makes people feel like they're using it. But sorry, in but what how it makes people feel using it. Sorry. Um, so I think there's also a new tempo that we're kind of having. It's like it's kind of keep up or get left behind. And I think this is kind of where it does get personal. I've been in rooms where engineering have built something, a working feature, they've deployed staging, and design hasn't even been in the conversation or finished research. Not because we're slow, but because the pace has changed underneath us. And I've seen projects ship a fully functional flow that nobody on design has reviewed. And it's always technically sound, but it still has, multiple usability issues, and things that would have been obvious if we just spoke to the customer and showed the customer. But like seeing that kind of really crystallize something for me. The challenge isn't about engineers are moving too fast. It's that the old model of design, then build doesn't work anymore. We can't upstream in a waterfall sense, but we have learned to run alongside engineering and not ahead of them. Advocating for the customer in real time, non handoff document 3 weeks before launch. But I think advocating for UX, um, I think advocating for UX doesn't slow things down. I think it's just being present in the right moments that matter. The decision points, the trade offs, the places where a small design choice has outsized impact on the experience. We're not blockers, we're the people making sure that speed doesn't come at the cost of the customer. And I think these are kind of like where designs kind of moves upstream. I think we're going to be moving from pixel pushers to product strategists, from wireframer to system thinker, from specifier to tastemaker. And I've kind of been looking at a lot what my job is these days, and it looks nothing like what I was hired to do 7 years ago. I used to spend most of my time in detailed mock-ups, pixel level work, and important work, but execution work. Now I spend most of my time in conversations, strategy conversations. What should we build next? Is this even the right problem conversations? And I think that shift is happening everywhere. Designers are moving upstream from how something looks to whether it should exist at all, from individual screens to how the whole system behaves, from handing off specifications to defining the intent behind what we're making. It's fundamentally a different job. And honestly, I find it more meaningful. It's harder, it's less tangible, but the impact is so much greater when you're shaping the direction after, rather than polishing the surface. Just to add, I think a colleague of mine yesterday told me that we're becoming builders, with engineers and with product managers, and I thought that was kind of a lovely way of like kind of shaping this. Um, so kind of things that remain ours and things that AI can't do yet, and hopefully maybe never do. um, I don't know where the line is between what AI will eventually be able to do and what will remain uniquely human. And nobody has that answer. But I do know that I've experienced in my own practice that feels irreplaceably human. And these are the four things that I kind of want to share that I don't think will be replaced by AI. The first one is knowing who you're building for, really knowing, not just reading a persona document, but understanding who you're actually designing for and who's actually going to use that product. Saying that this is wrong, even when the metric says otherwise, I've done that before. It's an uncomfortable conversation, but often is the most important conversation a designer can have. Picking that one small detail that makes the whole experience click. And then building trust with users over time, slowly, over months, over years, consistency and craft. These are like the things that I think, you don't learn from a data set. They come from showing up, paying attention, listening, and genuinely caring about the people that on the other side of the screen you're designing. I think that's something worth holding on to, and even everything else, and even as everything else changes around us. So I kind of been saying this lately. I think that we're becoming editors in chief, and I don't mean that dismissively, but like I think editing is an extraordinary skill. I think what a great editor does, they don't write the book, but they shape it. They know what to cut, they know what to amplify, they know what's missing, and they have a vision for the whole that a individual contributor can't always see. And that's increasingly what I find myself doing. I spend less time creating from scratch and more time curating, evaluating, directing. Um, yesterday I was like creating Figma mockups, and today I'm editing AI generated output, deciding what's good enough, what needs a human's touch. That tool hasn't changed, but the underlying craft, knowing what's good, what good looks like, hasn't. If anything, it matters more now because there's so much more output to sort through. That skill isn't about making the thing anymore, but it's knowing what that thing should be. And kind of how to advocate for UI and UX. Um, these are kind of just five things that I want to share with, and what have worked for me on a team where design where the design team is so small and the engineering team is so large. The first is learning to show the cost of bad UX in the language the business already speaks. Tie a confusing tie a confusing flow to a sport ticket, or link off a drop-off turn. When you frame a design problem as a retention problem, you stop being the nice to have and start getting dedicated time on the roadmap. The second time is prototyping in code. This is something my design team have been kind of adopting, and a lot of them and myself have started vibe coding with engineers, shipping working prototypes instead of handing off static mockups, showing them how it should work and the full UX of the flow. And I think, that can really change the dynamic between engineers and designers. Engineers will start treating us as collaborators and not people who just give them static screens. The third, and I think this one can be a little bit hard, is, making taste visible, learning to articulate why something feels wrong, not just that it does, but because bad design often ships when nobody in the room is brave enough to speak up and push back. And the fourth is owning the moments that AI misses, owning the empty states, the error message, all the different use cases. That the quiet seems where product doesn't feel human or feel hollow. And AI doesn't think about those moments, and we should. And the last and probably the most powerful is tell the user story. The researcher on my team, she has a full deck of insights, quotes from research sessions on agents in M365, and it's all things that real people have said. It's every single learning or research that has been done on agents in or is part of this document, and I use it all the time. I bring it into planning meetings, and it really can shift the conversation. No model has met a user. You have that, and you should be, you like, no model has met the user and you have, and that living understanding is your leverage. And I really encourage people to use it as much as possible. And kind of how I want to kind of close out on this is, we're not here to make things look good. We're here to make sure that the right things get built and they feel right. Um, and this is something that I've been sitting with for a while. Early in my career, I thought my job was to make things look good. And honestly, for a long time, that's what people expected of me. And I won't lie, I actually enjoy it. But the longer I kind of am doing this work more, and the more I kind of realize my job is to actually is actually like, sorry, I've realized the real job, the one that actually matters, is the one that to make sure that things feel right for the customer and the right things get built and it feels right when a person uses them. That bigger job, that's a bigger job than it used to be. And in a world where AI can generate anything, it's a more than necessary one. Someone has to care about whether we're building actually serves the people it's meant for. And someone has to hold the line of quality when the pressure is to ship is faster. And I genuinely believe that the world needs designers more than ever now. It just needs to show up in a different way than we used to. And I think that's something to be excited and not afraid about. And just to kind of finish everything out is I started this talk by kind of telling you guys about my experience working on a team with just three designers and then over 40 engineers and trying to keep up with the pace without losing sight of the customer. And I think that experience is a microcosm of where our entire profession is heading right now. You know, building isn't building got cheap and that's real, but it's not going to reverse. But caring, genuinely caring about whether we make sorry, what we genuinely caring what we make serves the people it's meant for, that didn't get cheaper. If anything, it got harder, it got more necessary. And I think something to hold on to is to go back to your teams, your projects, your daily work, and that world that the world needs more software. That the world doesn't need more software. It needs software that cares about you. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. So today I want to talk about why the things that we designers care about don't always end up on the roadmap and what can we do about it. So I won't talk a lot about craft or about how to get that seat on the table. It's simply about just communicating the value of the work that you're already doing and speaking a language that your stakeholders understand. So to introduce myself, my name is Pooja. In the last 16 years, I've gone from being a QA engineer to a software engineer to a product designer. I've been doing that for like nearly 9 years now. I'm currently a product designer at Arista Networks. My days are spent doing the job I love, thankfully. Um, my ever evolving list of hobbies. I've been knitting that scarf. It took me 5 months to knit that scarf. I'm still knitting a scarf that I promised my husband 2 Christmases ago. So, and also navigating life with two terrorists mostly holding me hostage. So, with that, I'm going to start my presentation with a story. So, this is a tool I worked on many companies ago, an internal tool that's used by a majority of the company, primarily support agents who use this tool to solve customer queries every single day. Now, the tool was built about 12 years ago at this point. The CEO himself built it in the good old early days. And in the years since, it had gotten bloated with more capabilities added, things added, with nearly zero consideration paid to user experience. And this is what I wanted it to look like. Now, what I want to talk about is now not how I got from the previous image to this image. What I want to talk about is how we made the case to close the gap between those two images. So I started, as we all do, and this is what we learn in our design courses and our boot camps: talk to your user. So we did. I spoke to a variety of users, sales and support and account managers, even engineers and PMs, anyone who was using the tool to serve our customers. And the feedback was quite unanimous, and they all hated it. It was bloated, it was slow, you could never find what you wanted in there. So they were spending ages training other people on it and then also fielding queries about where do I find this? How do I get this data? Now, that seems like a really strong signal, right? Like if I was doing this as a project in my bootcamp, I'd be like, oh, really strong signal, great case to make. We have to fix this. But no, leadership basically said, so what? It's an internal tool. It's been working fine. No customer is ever going to see this. So what's the point of building this? So at this point, you could probably be like, fair enough, move on to your next project. Or you could dig deeper. And that's what we did. Instead of looking at how the tool was being used, we looked at what the tool was being used for. And that was to serve the support tickets, to serve support agents who were trying to resolve queries for our customers. And that's the number that we found. 1.2 million hours a year that our customers were waiting for answers. That's a big number. That's 130-hour wait time per ticket over nearly 10,000 tickets. Of course, the CSAT was going to be low. Nobody likes waiting. And that was like, okay, that gets your people's attention. And the best part was, I had the qualitative feedback already to explain why this was happening, because I'd already spoken to the users. Now, the problem with having tickets taking 130 hours to resolve is that it creates imaginary ghost work, not imaginary, ghost work that wouldn't have existed if the ticket had been solved in 3 hours. You have customers following up with conversations, agents have to keep rereading the same old stale context. Customers will open the same issue in different channels, and now you have to merge and consolidate that. Add that over 10,000 tickets, and you've pretty much manufactured 1.8 employees worth of work. That's $153,000 a year in agent cost. Now, that's something the business is going to care about. Now, the beauty of this slide is this is based on zero internal data. This was industry benchmarks, industry averages, Glassdoor salaries, and I was able to come up with this number to get someone's attention. Same work, just a different framing. I didn't go back and do more user research. I didn't go try come up with imaginary numbers. I just asked a different question, told a different story, and suddenly it connected to something that our stakeholders actually care about. And that's where that language barrier comes in, right? So I started with, oh, users hate this tool. I've designed a much better experience. We should build this. What they heard was, there's no ROI here. Improving this tool isn't going to move any metrics. So why would we waste any resources on this? But if I'd started with this, customers are waiting 1.2 million hours a year for billing answers. And I can show you exactly why. Suddenly, they care. Because now I can work backwards. Because that's the gap, right? The gap was not between my design and a better design. The gap was between the language I was speaking and the language my stakeholders understood. So, because the design, as I said, was never the problem. Like, we've all been in those rooms where we've spent weeks coming up with designs that sit in Figma files or in slide decks, only for stakeholders to nod at their heads, gets deprioritized, goes in a backlog, never to be seen again. Not because the work was bad, just because the framing hadn't connected to anything they cared about. And that's where the problem is, right? So, how do we change that framing? And that's what I want to talk about. So, you change that framing by asking, so what? Just like the stakeholders did. Support agents find the tool slow and confusing. So what? Agents are spending ages training new people on the tool. So what? 45% of billing tickets take 130 hours to resolve. Less incredulous, but still, okay, so what? Customers are waiting 1.28 million hours a year for billing answers. Now, that's a number someone might pay attention to. Now, most designers will start at the bottom of this ladder, right? Because that's what we do. We lead with the user problem and we work our way backwards, maybe. But when you start there, nobody's listening. Instead, start here. Lead with the numbers. Because then, when you're talking about all the problems that customers face, your stakeholders are a lot more engaged. They care about your explanations because they care about the outcome. I don't have the numbers. Now, I'm sure this is the most common complaint you'll hear from designers because it's a real problem. We don't always have access to the data we need to create that framing. But it's also not the barrier that you think it is. We can get the numbers. If you don't have access to analytics, keep asking someone responsible till they give it to you. Because when you say, I want to understand the business better so I can create better outcomes, they're not going to say no to you. It's probably just a bureaucracy issue. Keep annoying someone till they give you access. Don't have budget for research? Read support tickets. 20 minutes of ticket reading is a completely valid research session. Talk to sales, talk to support, the people who have to hear about the product every day. They'll give you insights that you wouldn't have gotten otherwise. Don't have access to any internal data? There's so much out there. App Store reviews, Trustpilot reviews, industry benchmarks, G2, competitor reports. So much you can learn from. There's always a signal because you don't need the perfect numbers. You just need enough signal so that someone pays attention. So if you have conservative numbers, followed up by saying, I know there's a signal here, but I don't think we know enough. I know it's ambiguous. Can we maybe spend a bit time doing more research? Or say, I think we have a signal here to show that if we did this, we might be able to move this metric by X. Can we maybe ship it to 20% of our customers and see what we learn? It's so much better than doing nothing. Because when you create that framing, when you put all your assumptions on the table and own your methodology, it changes the way they see you from a delivery partner to a strategic partner. Now, there's nothing wrong with being a delivery partner. You probably all started out this way, right? But instead of just turning requirements into design, bring the insights, shape the decisions. Instead of being valued for speed and craft, which AI is doing a lot faster than us these days, you will be valued for your judgment. Instead of advocating for users, just your users, also advocate for the business. They're the ones who have to spend money to build something better for the user. And suddenly, you get, instead of being told, your work is really nice, but you start getting told, we really have to build this because it's going to move some metrics, it's going to make more money, it's going to improve something by something. And not making that shift is how designers get stuck. Over time, your role narrows, your influence shrinks, you get really good at implementing other people's ideas and far removed from any kind of decision shaping. And the longer you stay in that loop, the harder it becomes to get out of it. Because one day you wake up and you realize you're not even in the room when these decisions are being made. The good news is that this is all a learnable skill. None of what I've talked about today is a talent. It's practice. It's asking, so what, again and again, till you land on something a stakeholder cares about. It's converting a research insight into a cost that matters. It's understanding who's in the room, what they're responsible for, and adjusting your framing accordingly. And opens a world of opportunities for you. So I want to leave you with 3 things. And I want you to try at least one of these 3 things in the coming weeks. First, ask so what one more time. Take the last project you worked on or whatever you're working on at the moment. Take your strongest finding and keep asking so what till you land on something that a decision maker might care about. The next time you're in a room and a stakeholder asks for numbers or says, oh, we don't have the data to support it, ask them, what would give you the confidence to act? Because asking that question reveals the real barrier to action. Sometimes it might be a simple metric. Sometimes the real objection may not have been data at all. It might have been politics, it might have been timing, it might have been lack of resources. Either way, you learn something you didn't know before, and you don't go running and trying to scramble some numbers together to do a second pitch. You know when it's a losing battle, right? And that's makes you a better designer because you know where to invest your time and energy. And finally, take your last report, take a start from it, and rewrite it in terms of what the business cares about. So instead of saying 40% of users keep dropping off at the 3rd step of our upgrade process because there's so much friction there, instead say 40% of our users are dropping off. That translates into 100,000 monthly recurring revenue. And now it's a cost that the business cares about. Learn to do that transition. Speak both languages. And it expands our role and we become more than just people who deliver designs and Figma files. So I think that's all I have to say. So thank you for listening.
Hi, everyone. I'm Rebecca. Good evening. I hope pizza was good and you're filled up and re-energized, I hope. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how the design work that we're doing can really have an impact on the business, on the stakeholders that we work with, And not only for themselves, but also for us, right? And our portfolios and our CVs and our record of that impact. Okay, so a really important piece of our work. How do we? Oh, there we go. Okay, so I wanted to start off with, sharing some typical examples, scenarios that we might go through as designers on a day-to-day basis, right? So we might receive different requests around perhaps doing redesigns and thinking about, okay, we need to perhaps address a bit of user research, some usability testing, accessibility, privacy challenges, those types of things. We might also be asked to look at new features or existing features that we need to improve. So we might look at the user needs. Of course, we'd look at the user needs, the interaction patterns, information architecture. And another variation of a request that we might receive is also an optimization task, right? So looking at perhaps a form being completed a little bit better, right? And the user experience around that. Now, the important thing about those examples is that, would you agree that this is how we are traditionally doing them nowadays, right? That's kind of more or less end-to-end the areas that we would be looking at in those types of requests. Now, what I want to talk about today is to go that little step further in those types of scenarios, right? Where we're not only thinking about the design request, the project, and those steps that I've mentioned, but thinking about it a little bit wider and how we can address those types of scenarios with a little bit more influence on our team, our manager, our stakeholders, our customers, right? And also how that influence can lead to more impact, an impact that we can record, understand, and take with us and influence within the organization. Okay, that's a really important piece. So, as I said, my name is Rebecca, a little bit of background on me. So I am not a UX designer or any sort of a designer. I actually started my career in digital marketing. And I did digital marketing for almost 10 years. So I did everything from when it started, web design, app design, social media, copywriting, market research, all that good stuff. And then I went to work as a UX consultant strategist in Google. And I was there for about 6 years. And I'll be very honest, when I started in Google, I had no idea what UX was about. Not a clue. And luckily enough, Google actually hired me on the basis of my background of digital marketing and how that connected to UX and design. And that's exactly what I want to talk about today, because they are connected. And digital marketing, as we all know, it is about, campaigns, performance, impact. Well, UX and design is also that. Okay, and that's the connection that we need to make today. So I've worked across EMEA, I've worked across 200-300 different customer journeys, optimizing UX, design, customer experience, and also encompassing that digital marketing lens on it as well. Okay. Now, we're going to talk about 2 different scenarios today. This is the first scenario. So the first real life scenario we're looking at, we have our manager or leadership comes to us and says, we see a problem in the checkout. Checkout is always a friction point, right? We want to optimize the checkout. Off you go, right? So we start looking at the checkout. We all know that the checkout is always a friction point. So we know that, okay, it's likely that there's going to be some obvious challenges there, such as maybe payment step, form fields, validation, those types of best practices that we're always looking at, right? So we address the problem from that aspect initially. We start doing a little bit of a review on user behavior analysis, maybe some testing, getting a little bit of feedback. Great. Then we look at the discovery. So, okay, we probably know that there's always too many form fields on a form, right? Always. So how can we clear that up? Fix any error messages, trust signals, those types of things. We're all very familiar with this, right? So we know how to address it. Now, next step is that we start to do the optimizations, okay? So we implement a more simplified checkout form, we add some validations, some security badges, trust badges. Great, this is looking amazing, right? Then come the results. So we've implemented our design. We've told our leadership and our manager that it's now done. Great. What does that mean for us at that point? Have we done our job? Is it done? No, it's not, right? We think and we know that we've done a good job in terms of improving the customer experience, the checkout flow. We've reduced some friction because we've removed form fields, etc. There's probably going to be some higher completion rates, right? And yeah, there should be a good impact on revenue, right? We don't know, but hopefully, right? So this is the particular point where we can have a little bit more, use our intuition a little bit more and work with our teams and our stakeholders who don't work necessarily in design to understand that piece for ourselves better and for them. Okay? So here is the gap that we see. So on the left-hand side, we have what we know. So what we've just discussed, we know we've done we have a better user experience. We know we've reduced friction. There's probably going to be great, completion rates, better trust signals. Great. This is all looking well because I'm a UX designer and I know what I'm doing, right? What we're missing though, however, on the right-hand side is, okay, now that this design is optimized and it's live, those higher completion rates, were there many more? Were there less? Was there lots more? What actually happened there, right? Was there more sales as a result of that? I mean, we're optimizing the checkout. That is the point of sale, right? So I want to know, has my design impacted more sales? Because at the end of the day, the manager and the leader and the leadership who have asked me for this, that's what they're looking at. That's what they want. They don't want a better user experience. They want results. They want sales from that checkout flow now, okay? Increase sales. So it would be good to start getting a little bit curious about, well, those completion rates, by how much has that increased? How many sales more have come through that checkout now with that user experience? Has the churn, right, decreased, right? That's also something that we should start getting curious about, right? So I think it's very interesting in this bottom part here of must-have metrics and nice-to-have metrics. So the nice-to-have metrics are what we would probably look at mostly as designers, right? We'd look at customer satisfaction rates, maybe time to complete, checkout error rates, that kind of thing. That's all great, and they are nice to haves. They are not must-haves, right? Not from a business point of view, okay? I'm very sorry to tell you, but leadership do not care about these whatsoever, okay? And look, leadership will send out the CSATs and all of those things, but they basically don't translate into revenue or sales, right? So this is all great to have for ourselves, but what we really need to look at is also these must-have metrics. And I say must-have because we are designing not only for the customer, but for leadership who have asked us for this, who are looking for these changes. Excuse me. So in addition to these, we need to start thinking about, well, what was the baseline before? What was the baseline of completion rates of that checkout before we started optimizing? Right? So that then we have that benchmark of post our launch of optimized launch. What was that change? Right? So being curious from the very start, where are we starting from? So that once I put in my new design, what does that mean? What change have I made? Other than an improved user experience, what change have I made for the business? Right? Thinking about revenue impact, customer acquisition costs, right? So the more traffic that is pushed through a website into the checkout, and the more the conversion rate or the sales drop, the higher the customer acquisition cost, right? Leadership does not like customers that cost them a lot of money, right? So we need to think about when we're optimizing that checkout flow, that customer acquisition cost is something that we can be curious about, start asking about, right? And if we can say our design work or our optimization reduce the customer acquisition cost, that is a huge win for us, right? And something that we should be thinking about. Okay. Now, this is an example of an impact dashboard, okay? And this is what leadership or the managers who are giving you these requests around redesign, optimization, new feature, this is what they're looking at, right? And this is what triggers them to come and speak to your teams. Okay, so they are seeing, okay, we're seeing a 15% increase in revenue. That's great. 2% conversion rate increase. That's great. But could we do better? Because my manager or my boss is looking for a 4% conversion rate increase, right? And those are my targets. So we need to have a level of understanding of those demands and those requests, and start being able to maybe even be curious about asking for access to these dashboards so that you can have a look at them, see where those baselines are that you're starting from, and then also see the change post optimization. Okay. And believe me, asking for that access will only make your teams and leaderships go, oh, okay, well, they care about what I care about, right? So there shouldn't be any issues there, is what I'm trying to say, right? Okay, now, real life scenario 2 is a little bit different, okay? So real life scenario 1, we looked at a design request coming into our team. We look at the user needs, we optimize the design, and we have a sense of an improved user experience, but nothing too tangible that we can really say, yes, those are the impacts on that dashboard that we talked about, right? This is a slightly different approach. So this is what I'm calling a data-driven design approach. And we're going to take the onboarding process as an example, okay? So this is where either yourselves or a manager comes in and says, like I said, I have a 4% conversion rate target that I need to hit. I'm only getting 2%, for example, right? Can you help me figure this out, right? So in that respect, that's when we can start having more and more conversations with those types of stakeholders. Ideally, in that culture, that's where you would have perhaps access to those dashboards, access to analytics, right? Or some, quantifiable or qualitative tools that can give you a little bit more data, right? Not necessarily about the business, but about the performance or the baseline of the current design that's in place, okay? So leadership might come in and say, I have a 4% target conversion rate, fix it, right? Which is usually what they do, right? And you don't get much more detail than that, right? So as designers, I really believe that we need to, to be able to follow through on that influence and impact and build those relationships and our impact in the business. It's a really interesting space because when we get that very, very vague scope, what we need to do is start going, okay, well, what does that conversion rate mean? Is that conversion rate sales at the end of the checkout funnel? Is it a micro conversion throughout the funnel that's perhaps an engagement call to action that we need, right? What does it mean, right? So obviously that requires some conversation with leadership, but also it gives us the control and ownership to deep dive into that data and look at it from our design point of view, right? So leadership doesn't care why conversion rate isn't working, right? It just knows that it's not, right? So it's up to us to dive into the data and say, okay, let's look at the funnel. Let's look at where the conversion rate is falling, why it's falling. Let's talk to some users. Let's get a little bit more data. Is it particular landing pages, particular steps, right? This is all on the assumption that things are tracked very well, okay? And I understand that sometimes they're not. But that's where that's our space, right? To go into that data and deep dive from a designer's point of view. I designed this website, or a previous designer has been there, and only we can understand what engagement metrics are working and what not, right? Leadership don't look at that detail, so it's up to us to do that, right? So we have the challenge up at the top, which is where leadership come in and say, I want a higher percentage conversion rate. I have a target. Then it's up to us to go into that data access and analysis, right? Ask for data access, understand why that conversion rate isn't working. And that is a significant moment where you can not only identify from best practices what needs to be optimized, but actually target the specific design friction point that you can identify with that data, right? So you might be able to see that on a landing page or on a field that there's a high abandonment. If you tackle that particular design challenge with that data behind you, you will see you're not only attacking the issue quite categorically, but you will see an enormous impact on the other side because you are targeting very, very specifically the actual issue that's causing the lack of conversion rate. Do you see what I mean? So this data access and analysis is really important. And that's where this piece comes in, which is where our influence and our impact starts to kick off, right? So our strategic design solutions, this is where we're designing, we're optimizing, but we're being very strategic about it. We're basing it on data, not on best practices, not on only qualitative data, but what is actually happening with customers and where it's abandoning, and on translation, what leadership are seeing, right? So if we can target that specifically, our design, we will be able to have amazing influence and impact on that. So the following piece would be, we've identified the data point that has a lot of friction. We understand what we need to optimize and design for. We do so, and then we have to do a full circle moment. We have to go back to that baseline data that we had, right? We need to have a look at that conversion rate that leadership has mentioned. Has it moved, right? And what's really, really important that I see all the time that's just completely forgotten is that when we optimize any design, small, big, overall redesign, we need to think about what metrics are now involved in that new design, right? So we may be adding a field, for example, to a particular landing page. That field now needs to be tracked so that we understand the engagement of it, the conversion of it, okay? It's not simply about just the design, go for it. If we don't have full visibility going forward when it's implemented of how users or customers behave with that new design, then we are quite literally blind as to what we have done and have closed ourselves off from being able to have that influence and impact now going forward. Okay, so it is, I know it feels like I'm sort of expanding our scope as designers, but if we want to be able to have those types of conversations and be able to say, my design generated this amount of money, my design has done this for the business, then we need to be involved in those conversations, right? We need to understand a little bit about that business conversation, a little bit about measurement, that all encompasses our design. Okay, so once we do that and we have our metrics in place, we have an understanding of what's the baseline, what was the change after our design, because we've gone in and measured it and had those conversations, and we've put our new metrics in place that we will hold and use going forward when and if we need to optimize that piece again. And these are the types of conversations that we then need to go back to leadership with, right? We need to start saying, not, we improve the user experience, what's next? No, we will say, we will put this user experience in place and we've reduced the churn by 12%. The feature adoption has actually gone up by 35%. The average user lifetime value is increased by X per user. And this is a lovely one, this last one. My design work cost X, right? And you can get estimates of that online, right? No issues, right? And you can say, this is what it cost, my design work, and this is the value that's being brought in, right? So it cost me, my work cost 50,000 euros or dollars, and I brought in 2.5 million of revenue. That's an amazing statement, right? But you can only do that if you come from a data-driven place, right? And you have an understanding of having those conversations with management on how your design can have that influence and impact, okay? And believe me, they will show you a lot more respect and understanding going forward if we start having those types of conversations. Okay. I've been there. Okay, so how can we measure UX design for business impact a little bit better? What are the considerations there, right? So one of the first things that we need to think about is, okay, let's define our success metrics early, right? So when we have that request from leadership, we'll be like, great, yeah, we can deep dive into that. We can optimize that. What does success look like to you? Oh, well, I want a higher conversion rate. I want more sales. Great. Define that. By how much? What is the baseline? Where are we at? What do we want to achieve? Okay. Then we will escalate into combining data types. So having those leadership metrics and that context, deep diving into what that conversion rate might be. So we talked about looking at landing pages, engagement rate, abandonment rate, where are the friction points? Combining that with our qualitative tools and research that we have, which we're already amazing at, right? And then perhaps that third piece could be either building a measurement plan or influencing a measurement plan, Okay, so a measurement plan is quite simply, you have your success metrics, right? And then you have what those targets for those success metrics look like. That's it. It's very simple. Conversion rate plus 2%, engagement rate plus 5%. That's it. But you have it documented and you have it together aligned with your team. Okay, so it's almost like the common language between all of you. Okay. Now, one thing I did want to mention is some of the impact that I've been seeing on how AI is changing measurement and what we may typically or not typically see in our web design, UX design, in the customer experience in general. Okay. So one of the areas that I'm seeing is that there is a huge fall in website traffic at the moment. Okay, particularly at the discoverability stage of customer experience. Okay, because that is happening on AI platforms, right? Discoverability, exploration, product selection is all happening on AI platforms now, and to some degree, on in different scenarios, and conversion is happening as well. But when we start, the reason I'm mentioning this is because when we start looking at data a little bit closely, I don't want us to think, oh, well, our customer experience design is useless because all the website traffic has just gone, right? It's not the case. It's just discovery and shopping behavior is changing, and we need to have an understanding and an awareness of how the role of the website and the app is changing, and the place that the AI platform has when it comes to e-commerce and shopping behavior. Okay, so there is definitely a huge increase on brand recall as well. From a design perspective, AI platforms are not now just looking for the traffic and the volume and the conversion, which is what the Google model would have typically looked at, right? AI platforms now want that in order to reference your brand, but they also very much expect an established brand and an understanding that your brand means ABC, right? And that's part of our role in terms of creating and designing that customer experience, right? To make sure that we're being referenced and pulled up on those AI platforms as well. Okay. And as I said, shopping behavior is changing. So discoverability is happening a lot on AI platforms. So is conversion, and also, interestingly enough, persuasion, right? So everything that we do as designers in terms of persuasion, urgency, messaging, all those elements that are really key to driving sales and revenue are happening an awful lot on AI platforms. And we need to make sure that that reference point that's happening in AI platforms to our site or our product or service that we're trying to design for has that persuasion technique and messaging and content that we need to evoke within, those results pages, essentially, right? So just having a think about how that's, that will change tomorrow again, right? But it's about having that in mind. So really thinking about, from a customer experience point of view, design point of view, how can we marry, what we're trying to do now is really marry not only the assets, the owned assets that we have in our businesses, so our website, our apps, our media, but we need to marry them now with AI platforms, and we need to understand how the customers interact between them and what they need, okay? And that we're designing for both experiences. Now, you may have seen this before. So this is a UX tree. Thank you, Valentina. A UX tree diagram, right? Which essentially visualizes what a KPI tree looks like, okay? And this is a really important piece of work because it's something that we can absolutely do, when we have that initial request and we're trying to have an understanding of, well, I understand the challenge of what we need to design for and optimize for, but how are we going to measure this, or how is it currently being measured? So I understand that baseline that we talked about. So, we start here at the bottom. Of course, we're going to try and understand the user need and what is happening. And we need to move through into, okay, these are potentially some of the solutions that we want to put in place. How are we going to measure these, or how are they currently being measured? So we need to start thinking about UX metrics, right? So UX metrics is what I might call, very much from a digital marketing perspective, like a micro conversion, right? So a UX metric might be a video play, a form field completion, right? moving from a page, product listing to a product page, right? Those are UX metrics, right? Micro conversions that push the customer along the funnel right to the end, okay? Those are important, right? Because we need to understand how they navigate our experience, right? And what we need to have in place. Then we move up to UX KPIs. So UX KPIs are what perhaps a number of micro conversions would result in a macro conversion. So there might be a number of form fields that a customer fills, and then submits the form. That submission or that completion is that UX KPI, right? So now we're getting inching closer towards business conversation, business KPIs, okay? But we're not there yet, okay? So the submission of the form is great, right? But the submission of the form for us is what the business would call a lead, right? Or a potential customer or prospect, right? And that's when we start to move into business KPIs. I hope you can see that, yeah? And that's what your manager or the leadership will be caring about. So we need to do the exercise ourselves of understanding in that design request, we need to go through this process, right? Understanding user needs, go into UX metrics, which may or may not be tracked, but if not, we need to own that, move into UX KPIs and get to that business KPIs. And that's when we can start equipping ourselves with the confidence to have that conversation with leadership. Yeah, and we can start speaking their language. Now, in those meetings, right, whether it be the scoping meeting or the ones that follow, it's really important that we have, as I've mentioned, the steps that we have in place around understanding baselines, understanding metrics, their language, what they care about. So there's a huge piece around every person at that meeting, not just ourselves, needs to align with the goals of the business. We're all there for the same reason. We have different roles. We probably work in silos, right? I've worked in those places as well, right? We have our teams and we probably have our individual goals, but everybody works in the same business. And that's what we all need to focus on in that meeting. We all need to align on what those goals are, okay? Communicate in business language, and I don't mean we need to be experts in business or how the business works. We just need to have an understanding of that UX metric, KPI, and business context, right? And with that, we will build trust, as we've discussed. How are we doing for time?
Oh, yeah, we are short with time.
Okay, so we will go to here. So some of the stakeholder perspectives that we need to think about, because these are usually the three people that are in the room with us, right? Certainly at the very beginning, right? And if they're not, they should be. Okay? So the CEO perspective, what do they care about? They care about revenue growth, competitive positioning, strategic alignment. That's all they care about. They don't care about the customer experience, about engagement, about conversion. They simply do not. And we don't need to make them care about that. Okay? That's not their role. Okay? But we do need to have influence on them with that. Okay? The marketer perspective, they care about conversion rates, customer acquisition costs, brand consistency, showing up in AI platforms. Okay, that's what they care about. So we need to have an understanding of that the customer experience isn't just about designing for great engagement, it's about these final goals as well. Okay, feeding into that. And look, designers and developers have always had friction, right, for as long as I can remember. But we have to be able to work together, right? Actually, I meant to add a really good, funny video of developer and designer here, but look, another time. But the technical feasibility of what they have to work with, the boundaries, the constraints that they need to work with is something that we need to respect, right? Like they respect our design skills, right? And what we need to work for. So we can't simply push a design on them and say, well, you have to work it, because behind the developers team and their role is leadership on what they have decided to invest in that aspect of the business. Okay. Like marketing, like everything else. Okay. So the important thing is that we go in with alignment of goals, of perspectives, of what we're trying to achieve together. Okay. And understand, I think one of the most valuable things that I have been told or I have learned through experience is that every single person in those stakeholder meetings, every single person has a customer's point of view, right? Every single one of them, not just us. We work in customer experience and in user experience, of course, But the CEO has a perspective on their customers. They have an understanding of those. Customer service does as well. Marketing does, right? Developers do. So it's about having an appreciation for that customer point of view and bringing it all together. Okay. So, I have a challenge for you. And you know what it's going to be, right? Yeah, it's pretty obvious. So, in your next project briefing, start asking, what's the current baseline? Where are we starting from? What are the business goals? What are we trying to achieve for the business? What are the success metrics? What does success look like for you? I know what it looks like for me from a design point of view, but for you? Who are the stakeholders? Who are the decision makers? Right? What are the constraints? And perhaps what is the competitive landscape? Right? We probably do that somewhat automatically, but it's great to have the other's perspective. As I said, everybody in that room has a customer point of view. Bring all that in. Okay, and we will have a much more cohesive and holistic customer experience, and we'll then all be able to be part of that impact. Okay. Thank you.
I am going to close today's event with talking about how a lot of things that we've spoke about today about strategy and increasing your influence on a company can be driven by a UX process, and how we did this and achieved this shift with our process in VHI, and that ultimately won us a Spider Award plug for Best Website Large Company in 2026. So first of all, lovely to meet you all. I've met a few of you. My name is Jane. I've worked in VHI for 3 years with the amazing Valentina. um, and before that, I worked in AIB for 2.5 years, and I've got my master's in UX and a bachelor's in product design. But the reason why I included this was because my career has largely been shaped by in-house UX teams where UX starts off in a really low maturity place. But fortunately, when it came to VHI, I noticed that there was a huge transition happening, and we were kind of in that middle state where we were enabled to do great work, and it was more about how did we use this work to scale up our influence. So the information architecture project started off with kind of one strategic goal from the overarching organization, and that was that VHI was transitioning from a health insurer to a healthcare provider, and that was a pretty big task at the time. VHI were typically seen as a health insurer for a long period of time, so being able to kind of achieve a strategy like this required organizational buy-in from everyone. Um, and what we were trying to achieve with web information architecture redesign was how can we make sure that we're supporting that overall strategy with the individual project goals. So I created a little kind of infographic just to try and highlight how we connected our goals from this project, our goals as UX team, to the overarching company strategy at the time. So our information architecture redesign goals were quite simple. We wanted to streamline navigation, and we knew that by doing that, we'd enable easier access to the healthcare content that we were trying to make space for on the website. We wanted to become a member education support tool to provide that healthcare content and try and give space for that transition and provide more content. To communicate the new brand story, because brand and marketing were doing a huge piece of work at the time to try and communicate this new story to our customers. And scale web governance, because we knew that when we were in a healthcare space, we would be hosting a lot more content. So we needed to scale up the website to support this content. But to kind of go a level deeper from a UX perspective, we knew that we could use this project to try and increase VHI's overall UX maturity. So we knew if we could achieve all these things and ultimately make them connect to the overarching company strategy, we'd be able to increase our maturity as a UX team. So our approach, everyone is familiar with, the great work we do as UX designers, but kind of just to show this, to touch on this briefing. So as I mentioned, we started off with our strategy. We aligned the project goals to support VHI's and the UX strategy as well. We did our user research, so we grounded everything in a user-centered research approach. We had to align to the European Accessibility Act with inclusive design principles. And then UX design, iterating design with multiple rounds of testing and validation and concept testing. And then cross-team collaborations. So we had cross-functional partnerships across VHI between business, content, and UX. So a lot of good stuff going on there. But just to mention that. But I guess one of the first things from a strategic perspective that we did and continue to do is stakeholder buy-in. Because ultimately, to create influence, like for such a small team that is still relatively new, we needed that top-down transformation. We needed buy-in from the top down. And this term, I think Sarah mentioned earlier, pixel pushers. When I kind of first came to VHI, I think we were finally in a space where we were able to do proper UX work and good UX work. We were able to, test and do the discovery and validate and reiterate. But then it became about how do we take this work and create it with influence. So transitioning from pixel pusher to strategic partner was something that we wanted to achieve by stakeholder buy-in. So the first thing that we actually did was immerse them in the journey. So getting buy-in from the start is always key. We opted for user interviews. Usually that's kind of optimal because you're getting like an individual conversation with your stakeholder one-on-one. You're kind of avoiding groupthink and you're starting to get to understand your stakeholder objectives on a one-on-one level. We did workshops with them. So anytime we wanted a very specific piece of feedback on the design that was more business related, we would kind of provide a space to do that, provide a forum, and ultimately it makes them feel like, their feedback matters, because it does. We need to see design through business perspective. And playbacks. Playbacks were very carefully curated, kind of a group effort approach where we would play back our designs alongside user research. And that was like, here are the key changes and why, and here was the last round of testing, and here's what their last round of testing showed, and then these are the new key changes and why. So everything was always aligned very nicely with research and design. Backing everything up with data. Obviously, when you come into those sessions and you have like, this was like a very different way of approaching the navigation, and I'll touch on that in a little bit, but you want to be able to rationalize every major change that you've made with some form of data, because you're going to be queried. It's easy for stakeholders to kind of pick holes in your design, but when you come backed up with data, it just gives your design a whole new level of quality. And then ultimately coming to those sessions with confidence, I think that lends itself to the previous point. If you come with really good rationalization, good data backed up your designs, like, you're going to come in with a degree of confidence that I think is going to land with stakeholders. And then collaborations. I mentioned before that these playbacks were very carefully curated. Myself and one of the fellow researchers kind of did a lot of testing. Like, we kind of did our own mini UX process about how to actually communicate these designs with stakeholders. So we would kind of practice and rehearse and test with people on our team to see how are these designs landing, and what's the best way to show them, because sometimes presentations don't land, sometimes showing them a big Excel sheet full of research doesn't land. You just have to find that sweet spot of how to actually communicate your design to stakeholders. And then defining the most impactful KPIs, which kind of is perfectly linked to the previous one with Rebecca. So yeah, you want to make sure that it's impactful and that, like, you're considering every stakeholder in the room and what KPI matters to them. And you want to benchmark them pre-design and then measure them again so that you can actually have that measurable value. And be honest. Like, I think that kind of might be an obvious one, but I think that it's tempting to hide the negatives, but I wouldn't do that too much because I think it invalidates your process. So putting in like honest KPIs and honest results makes you a little bit more appear more authentic as a designer and a researcher in UX in general. So some of the feedback that we were getting kind of pre this type of approach was like very much our we were perceived as like a delivery focused team, where like the point was to get the product in front of the member and the achievement was that it went live. Like, that was kind of seen as like the win. But after we started doing this work and we started bringing them on the journey, we were hearing things like we didn't even know that we had these in-house experts. So you can really change the perception of, how business views you and your value simply just by bringing them on the journey and making them feel part of it. And the second thing I want to talk about is growth mindset. So it's kind of a soft one, but I think it actually is a little bit understated. Like,
We didn't pretend to be experts. Instead, we embraced being learners. And this curiosity really fueled high quality work that caught people's attention. So I think approaching any project or any piece of work with a growth mindset and not kind of pretending to be an expert is a really nice way of just setting yourself up for success. So I think like there was a couple of people who'd done a few modules in it, but as a team we were relatively inexperienced, and it was like a unique project. So we all kind of embraced that role of, okay, we're going to learn how to do this first, and then we're going to do it really well. So how we did this? Well, we sought out the experts. We kind of attended talks. We got, speakers in. We did literature searches. We leveraged what we had. We were peeling through our textbooks. We were kind of going over things and taking notes, like just leveraging what you do have, but acknowledging that you are not the expert. So bring in the experts and learn from what's out there, because there is a lot of stuff out there and there's a lot of case studies and great things to learn from. And then going beyond the call of duty, I was kind of talking briefly about this on the break, but that designers do wear multiple hats. So where we noticed a project kind of, or the project losing momentum, or we noticed a gap, we were like the first ones to kind of fill that gap, because we knew the importance of this project. So whether it was work tracking or content, we were like prepared to jump right in and make sure that gap was filled. And it wasn't a huge piece of work, it was just something that we wanted to make sure we covered so that we didn't lose momentum. And working together, like, it's an obvious one, but I would encourage you not to stay in your lane. Like in our team, we are lucky that we have like research and content, but everyone kind of collaborates really freely, and we can move between the specialities really freely. And it just lends itself to really high quality work. So just something to consider. But to take a step a little bit outside the strategy for a second and just show you what I'm talking about when I say new information architecture. Um, this launched in 2025. So this was the new website navigation. We had a couple of different elements. It's still ongoing. There's still phased releases happening at the moment, but the big piece was the navigation. So the enhanced footer, we had a really shallow footer. But we learned, because we were very open to learning, that footer dominant behavior in websites is very common. So we optimized our footer for hard, like kind of niche content. But it did solve the fact that a lot of what was in the footer was like very buried and very shallow and very hard to find. Um, in terms of the nav bar, then we opted for mobile accordions. We explored a lot of different concepts. We tried out sequential menus. They proved a little bit tricky. Mobile accordions were good at minimizing scrolling and promoted a clutter-free interface. We opted for global search because I think it was like a huge percentage of our users during user testing were just looking for that search bar. I mean, it's a super obvious one, and it was originally hidden in our footer, but we brought it up into the navigation, into the top nav bar, improving speed and findability. And then we opted for a mega menu desktop navigation approach. It's shallow, it reduces click depth, and it boosts accessibility and engagement. But all of this stuff was kind of aiming to solve the fact that our content was not following a consistent framework whatsoever. There was no logic. It was incoherent, inconsistent, very fragmented, and just had a really poor, disconnected experience for the user. And we kind of reorganized our whole navigation based on the main jobs to be done of our users. So everything was very user-centered. But that was just a quick run through of the solution. To dig into the results then, because, as mentioned before, this is what's going to land, this is what's going to get you perceived as a valuable team. The challenge or the goal we were trying to solve for was finding healthcare services was super difficult, as I mentioned before about the incoherent information. So this obviously was going to support our strategic shift overall, and this resulted in a 17% increase in service page engagement. So people were actually going to these healthcare service pages now, reading them, which like directly supports that strategic shift. It also resulted in a 520% increase in search function uses. Obviously, you're going to bring it up the page, people are going to use it a lot more. So this meant that users were discovering services independently, engaging with care first content instead of insurance products. And that was the ultimate objective at the time. So like even that in itself was really showing how we were helping VHI to achieve their overall strategy. So very powerful figures there. A couple of ones worth mentioning. So support at the time was really hidden, like really very hard to find. And if we wanted to become the member education support hub that we had set out to become, we noticed that after the redesign, there was a 48% increase in self-service FAQ usage and a minus 12% decrease in contact requests. So I think that really points to the value of good design, a good navigation. This meant that users were able to self-serve effectively, reducing calls and making help feel approachable and human. And then the last one I'll mention is the navigation and task completion. That was originally very unclear. We set out to streamline the navigation, and this resulted in a 5% increase in task success and a reduction in 23 seconds in time on task. So this meant that tasks were completed faster, more intuitively, making digital interactions now feel as human as speaking to a clinician. So everything there is supporting the overarching goal for BHI to transition from a healthcare or a health insurer to a healthcare provider. Um, so ultimately now, after the redesign, there's over 13 million digital interactions by the end of 2025. And VHI.E is now our primary channel for member connections. So a couple of key results there that really leverage the value of the work that we did on this project. But it's important to say that, I guess, and I think this is a common theme, but like the the craft of UX doesn't end when you're finished the work, when you've handed over when you've handed over your work and you can see it's performing really well. It really comes down to a little bit of self-promotion. And that's where the importance of narrative comes in. So UX-led change is driven by visibility. And it's probably one of the most important things is like doing your work is one thing, but how you communicate that work is another, and it's equally as important. And by promoting our successes across the business, we turn UX into a powerful influence, one that changed the way VHI thinks. So like, I guess now that you've done the work, it's really time to claim the victory. So what we did was we're in the process still of writing a case study, and this is going to tell the full story end to end of the design process. Some stakeholders will be familiar with that having been brought along, but it's really important to really write it in a way that's user friendly, that's like from a non-UX perspective. How do you communicate a UX process? Just use great language and make sure that it's like, I guess, easy to read and understand from a non-UX perspective. Own the victory. Make sure you put all of your names on it, all of your team's names, because it's really important that they know who you are. We're putting photos in it. They'll get to know your face, that kind of stuff is important. And then circulate that as much as possible. Use any avenues, use any channels, any email threads, any forums. Promoting the work, a little bit different, is the presentations and the workshops and the walkthroughs that I want to mention before. You should present these at any chance you get. I think originally when we were doing this, there were so many requests for it that it became like almost irritating, but in a really good way. And you have to use as much channels as possible. Like literally, as I was mentioning before, any kind of town halls, any major team meetings in your department, to use it as an opportunity to present and promote your work. And celebrate the milestones. As I mentioned, it's going through a phased release. So every single time something goes live, use it as an opportunity to shout about it and celebrate it and own those little individual victories. And then the last one, go for the awards. Worked out pretty well for us. But even just going for them, I think it's a great experience because like it's great external validation. One thing if you do win, because I think sometimes we can talk about winning loads, we can talk about how wonderful it is, and we can talk about like inside your organization people promoting your work, but ultimately if you kind of get one of these awards, okay, it might not be the KPIs that we talked about, but it is great external validation, and it's amazing how much people will recognize the work you do if you just have like an award to reference. And that brings me to brand perception and optics. It's always good to be seen to be doing this kind of work in front of your competitors, and it's the type of thing that business and organization really love to see you doing. And even if you don't win, it's really, really rewarding, and it teaches you how to communicate the value of the work you're doing, and you'll meet wonderful teams and you'll see other great projects as well. So that kind of leads me to my final point, which is that your work as a designer doesn't stop after go live. Self-promotion and communication can be major drivers of change. So it really comes down to how you communicate your work after you've done all the good stuff and it's been really successful. you have to shout about it from the rooftops. And that in itself will change your position, change your influence within your organization. Um, so what's changed since this? Well, I guess the role of UX has significantly changed since this project. We've been able to majorly scale up our influence. So UX is typically seen as like a last stop in the assembly line. As I was saying, very delivery focused, just a means of packaging the work. But now we're a part of the decision-making process around an intake and value delivery. So it means that we have a little bit more control over why we're doing the work that we're doing and what we actually take on board. So before, like a lot of this would have been design, very much like a kind of, getting a document or a brief of some kind that would have told you exactly what to put on the page to the very last content. And maybe there might be a little bit of room for research. And then discussions would be largely like reclarifications, like, going back to the business and asking a million questions that you really should have had the answer for before you even started the work, or it might not even have led to the work in the first place. Now, the role has changed. We're still doing the design because it's still important in the research. But there's more strategic thinking in our role. We're more thinking now, how does this work connect to an overall strategy, and how do we influence value at a higher level? There's more discussions. We're in the room for a lot of, these conversations about how work is actually aligning to a strategic goal and whether or not it's even worth doing. And decision making, like as I mentioned before, deciding whether or not this work is going to align to an overall strategy, and whether or not it's going to add value. Streamlining the workflow. So yeah, this is kind of basic stuff, but it did help us to, I guess, move from a very waterfall process to more agile, and design being involved in this like one very small stage when all of this conversation and all of this decision had been made, and now we're just seen as like, okay, now package up the product or the service and just push it live. Now it's more iterative, and we are virtually involved at every stage. So it means more meetings in the diary, but it definitely means more productive conversations and UX at a much higher level. And then finally, a seat at the table, which kind of is more or less what I was saying before. But since completion of this project, UX is viewed as a strategic partner, someone who's an ally of growth and whose voice matters when decisions are being made, rather than that last stop to delivery that I was mentioning. So just to kind of summarize that in a few points, we've had like 3 new hires since this project. So our team is growing significantly. We have UX decisions made in strategy now, so higher up, more upstream. We've been trusted to spearhead 2 new major projects, and we are like much more well known across the organization, collaborating across a lot of cross-functional teams. So we're very much more of a presence across the organization now. So yeah, UX is not just improving products, it can reshape how a company thinks and operates. And that's ultimately, I think, what we were trying to achieve, and increase our UX maturity, and which it has significantly, even in the last 3 years since I've been here. The role of a UX designer has changed significantly, and our maturity is definitely growing a lot. So that was us with the spiders, having a great time. I'm sure you'll recognize Val and myself. But yeah, thank you for listening. Happy to take any questions.